On April 5, 1980, the day before Easter, the nuns in the small chapel of Charity Hospital in downtown Toledo were busy preparing for the evening mass and the Easter mass the next day. At 8:20, Sister Mary, who was in charge of the ceremonies, planned to go to the sacristy to call Father Zara Robinson to discuss the hymns that would be used in the evening mass. This room was located right next to the church, about 20 square meters in area. When she arrived, Sister Mary found that both doors leading to the sacristy were locked. This made her feel a little strange, because when she had just left, the door was still open. Why was it locked in front of her eyes? However, she did not think much about it, took the key from her pocket and opened the door. As soon as she opened the door, she saw a person lying on the floor. Instinctively, Mary took a few steps back, but then she thought again. In such a sacred place, no one would dare to play tricks. Moreover, the curtains of the room's windows were not drawn, so the view was also limited. In the dim light, her first reaction was to think of a dummy used for medical practice in the hospital. But when she got closer, the scene before her eyes made her scream in horror. Lying on the floor, in a pool of blood, was Sister Margaret Powell, who was in charge of managing the storage room. Miss Margaret's body was in a strange position. Her clothes were torn, her pants were pulled down to her feet. This bloody scene made Sister Mary panic. She hurriedly ran out of the room and called for help from others in the church. The police quickly arrived at the scene, blocked off the area and began investigating. The victim, Margaret, 71 years old, was from Stjorton, Ohio. She came from a family of 8 siblings. Although life was not very prosperous, her family always lived very happily. From a young age, Margaret was intelligent, studious and always wanted to become a member of the Sisters of Mercy. The Sisters of Mercy was founded in 1831 by Catherine Macaulay, a Roman Catholic religious organization. The organization's mission was to serve the poor, sick and hungry, with a special concern for women and children. Therefore, many nuns of this organization worked in the fields of education, health and community projects. At that time, this was a very famous religious organization. The family of the victim, Margaret, were all devout Catholics. Her 2 cousins also joined the Sisters of Mercy. Therefore, the family strongly supported Margaret's participation in the church. After graduating from college, Margaret officially became a nun. She began her nursing training and earned her license. She then worked in administration and ministry at various charitable hospitals in Ohio for several decades. At age 62, due to her hearing and memory problems, she was transferred to the chapel next to the charitable hospital in Toledo to manage the cloakroom. Her social relationships were quite simple. She was a perfectionist, strict, upright, and dedicated to her work. Those who liked her held her in high regard, while those who did not like her thought she was conservative and did not know how to change. However, these things did not lead to the need to kill her. Through the investigation, the police learned that on the day of the crime, Margaret woke up at 5 a.m. as usual. At about 6:50 a.m. after breakfast, she left the dining room to go to church to prepare for Easter. On the way to church, Margaret met another nun and 2 drivers who had just finished their night shift. After that, no one saw her again. It was not until an hour and a half later that her body was discovered lying in a pool of blood. The scene investigation showed that Margaret was lying face up on the floor. There was a strangulation mark on the neck. Both arms were stretched straight along the body, palms facing up. Both legs were closed and straight. There was blood splatter on the forehead. There were dozens of stab wounds on the left cheek, neck and chest. A long white cloth was partially covered over Margaret's right arm. The rest was under the right side of her body. A cross was inserted into her private area. There were no signs of resistance on the victim's body. The scene looked like some kind of evil ritual. In addition, the door and windows of the storage room were intact, with no signs of vandalism. The charity hospital and the storage room did not have any property missing. If the perpetrator was a stranger, when he broke into the storage room, he would definitely make Margaret alert. However, there were no signs of resistance on her body. Therefore, the police speculated that the perpetrator was an acquaintance, and it was clear that the perpetrator had a deep grudge against Margaret, so he acted so cruelly to take revenge. After the autopsy, it was found that Margaret had a total of 31 stab wounds on her face, neck and chest, all of which were fatal. No traces of semen were found on the victim. 9 stab wounds near the heart on the left chest, looking like an inverted cross. The murder blade was determined to be about 7.6 centimeters long. 1.3 centimeters wide, with fur edges, and a diamond-shaped cross-section, based on the fact that the killer pulled Margaret's pants down to her ankles, placed the cross in her private area, placed an inverted cross on her chest, and used her blood to draw on her forehead. The police speculated that the killer was performing a satanic worship ritual. He had a very deep understanding of religious rituals and symbols. Satan is the embodiment of evil in any religion. Satan worshippers are often divided into two types. The first type believes that Satan possesses great power to gain special abilities. They hang crosses upside down, use dirty water to bless, use naked women's bodies as altars, sacrifice children and animals. Finally, they have sex with altars. The characteristic of this type is to blaspheme and defile sacred and pure things. The second type sees Satan as a symbol of worldly lust. They seek to satisfy their sinful desires through a series of depraved acts. They see this as a way to pursue Satan. In short, the perpetrator is someone who knows Margaret, has a grudge against her, and is knowledgeable about religious rituals. So who is this person? Because no traces such as hair, fingerprints, or murder weapons were found at the scene, the investigation of the case encountered many difficulties. However, just when the police were at a standstill, the most unlikely suspect appeared. In the small church of Charity Hospital, there were 2 priests and more than 20 nuns. They were both in charge of the church and taking care of patients in the hospital. Immediately after the incident, the police began questioning people in the church and the hospital. Everyone mentioned the same name, Father Zeta Sobenson, 42 years old, originally from Toledo. Under the strict education of his mother, he was determined to become a priest early on. After many years of studying at the convent, at the age of 26, he achieved his wish. By the age of 31, he was quite famous locally, and was considered an example for other priests to follow because he had never made a mistake. Was such a person related to this murder? Through the investigation, a nun in charge of housekeeping in the church said that there was indeed a conflict between Father Robinson and Sister Megadeth. Mrs. Megadeth's perfectionist personality often led to arguments with Father Robinson when discussing church affairs. Due to her advanced age, Mrs. Megadeth suffered from hearing and memory loss, so Father Robinson sometimes had to repeat instructions from his superiors. It is known that the priest felt quite uncomfortable about this. Moreover, the day before the incident, the two had a rather heated argument. Mrs. Megadeth was angry because Father Robinson arbitrarily shortened the time of the Mass. Mrs. Megadeth believed that even a priest should not arbitrarily take away the opportunity for people to pray and repent to God. She severely reprimanded Father Robinson for this. Was this argument the last straw that caused the long simmering conflict between the two to explode? Did Father Robinson, in a fit of rage, kill Mrs. Megadeth? However, there is still no concrete evidence for this hypothesis. Another priest in the church also spoke up. He frankly told the investigators, "I think Father Robinson is the murderer. The conflict between him and Mrs. Megadeth is very deep." After the incident, the hospital loudspeaker made an urgent announcement, asking everyone to come to the church. I rushed there. At that time, many doctors, nurses and nuns were present, but Father Robinson arrived very late. His bedroom was not far from the storage room. It was impossible not to hear anything. In the end, the hospital manager had to call him. Moreover, when he arrived, he appeared calm, his eyes were lifeless, and he seemed not surprised at all. This was not a normal reaction of a person when hearing about a murder. Therefore, Mrs. Megadeth's death was definitely related to him. A week after the incident, some people in the church told the police that at about 7:30 a.m. that day, they heard hurried footsteps on the second floor. It sounded like something very serious had happened. The people working on the first floor listened quietly for a while and were sure that the noise came from the second floor, where Father Robinson's bedroom was, because the location of the footsteps was only Father Robinson's room. It was obviously unusual for a priest to be in such a hurry so early in the morning. A doctor also said that after hearing the emergency announcement on the loudspeaker, he rushed to the storage room. Because he had never been to the church before, he ran the wrong way. When he was about to turn back, he saw a priest wearing a black robe. Because he was in a hurry at the time, he only glanced at the priest and vaguely remembered that he was a middle-aged man with brown hair, about 30 to 40 years old. These features all matched Father Robinson's appearance. If the person the doctor saw was Father Robinson, it would mean that he had left the room and knew something was wrong. However, he did not go to the electric field immediately. This made his actions even more suspicious. As suspicions about Father Robinson grew, 2 weeks after the incident, the police searched his room. In a drawer, they found a paper knife about 20 centimeters long, with four diamond-shaped cross-section edges. The handle of the knife had a circular brass embossment for decoration. The size and shape of the knife matched the forensic description of the murder weapon. Upon inspection, the knife was found to be unusually clean, without any traces, including fingerprints, because it had been carefully cleaned. Later, on the embossment, investigators discovered a small smudge. The results showed that it was blood. However, the amount of blood was too small to determine whether it was the victim's blood or not. Based on these clues, despite public pressure, the police summoned Father Robinson to the station twice for questioning. During the interrogation, Father Robinson deliberately avoided the police's questions. On the surface, he appeared to be very cooperative, even disregarding the church's principle of secrecy, despite the risk of being expelled, saying that he knew who the killer was, because the killer had come to confess to him at church. However, when the police asked more about the criminal and the details of the killer, Father Robinson faltered. Then he changed his statement, saying that he had lied to escape suspicion. In fact, he knew nothing. At that time, the usual practice for the police in such cases was to use a lie detector. However, the test results were unclear, and it was impossible to confirm whether Father Robinson was lying or telling the truth, although he had obvious abnormal reactions when answering questions related to Margaret's death. It was not enough to conclude that he was lying. Later, the police learned that Father Robinson had taken a magic pill before taking the lie detector test. That was why the test results were unclear. Unfortunately, the police discovered this too late, because before the investigation was over, Bishop Toledo colluded with the former deputy police chief to take Father Robinson out of the police station. Father Robinson was quickly transferred to another place by the church. This action was not uncommon at that time. It was a way that the church often used to protect its reputation and cover up its scandals. Although many clues pointed to Father Robinson, due to the lack of solid evidence, he could not be charged. After Father Robinson was taken away, the investigation fell into a deadlock. This sensational case gradually became an unsolved case and was forgotten for 2 to 3 years. In 2003, 2 or 3 years after the murder, the Toledo Police Department received a letter from a woman. In the letter, the woman said that as a child, she was forced by a male cult to participate in a horrific satanic ritual. During the ritual, members of the cult dressed as nuns and sexually abused her. They placed an upside-down red cross on her, threw her into a snake pit, and placed her next to a sacrificial object to force her to keep her secret. When she was 11, the cult implanted human eyeballs in her eyes, making her believe that her every move was being watched. At age 14, she was introduced to Father Robinson by a priest in the cult. She then had sex with Father Robinson several times in exchange for money. She never dared to recall these painful memories until she contacted an organization that specializes in supporting victims of abuse by priests. It was then that she decided to reveal the secret she had kept hidden in her heart for many years and denounce those who had violated her. The incident mentioned in the letter happened a long time ago. The police had difficulty finding evidence to confirm, however, the negative information about Father Robinson in the letter made the police decide to reopen the murder case of Sister Margaret. However, after 2 to 3 years, the old case file was no longer complete for many reasons, making the investigation difficult. The police reviewed the remaining documents and finally focused on the white cloth covering the victim's body and the paper knife suspected to be the murder weapon. This paper knife belonged to Father Robinson at the time of the crime. He himself did not deny nor say that he had lent it to anyone. Therefore, if it is proven that this knife is the murder weapon, it indirectly proves that Father Robinson is the murderer. After careful examination and numerous experiments, investigators discovered that the paper knife blade matched the stab wounds on the white cloth and the wounds on Sister Margaret's body. Furthermore, among the numerous blood stains on the white cloth, one matched the handle of the knife and another matched the tip of the handle. This reinvestigation not only made a major breakthrough in the physical evidence but also revealed that Father Robinson was not as holy as many people thought. In addition to the accusation of the woman who wrote to the police, another woman also accused Father Robinson. She said that she was violated by Father Robinson during a ritual. In a previous report that was verified, Father Robinson participated in an organization called the Sisters of the Masked Mary. The members of this organization were all lay people in Toledo, but when they gathered at the church, They wore the habit of nuns. From the information that Father Robinson was frequently transferred from one parish to another, and was repeatedly demoted, it can be seen that the church had noticed that Father Robinson had a problem from that time. With this evidence, a year after reopening the investigation, the police arrested Father Robinson, now 66 years old, for attempted murder. They also searched his home and discovered a large cardboard box in his bedroom, containing hundreds of photos of bodies in coffins. There were both old and recent photos. On his bookshelf was a small book on occultism. This book was published before the crime. From the signs marked in the book, it can be seen that the reader paid close attention to the important points recorded. Notably, there was a bolded passage that gave instructions on how to perform satanic worship rituals, how to use women's bodies as altars, how to violate them, and finally kill them. The news of Father Robinson's arrest for murder immediately shocked public opinion. Society was divided into two opposing opinions. Some people supported the police and believed that he was the murderer. However, some people said that Father Sue was a kind person and could not have done such a cruel thing. He must have been harmed. Some believers even raised $12,000 to help Father Robinson pay for his legal fees. Under pressure from public opinion, the police both exhumed the body of the nun Margaret for re-examination and sought the help of Dr. Li Shuangyu, an expert in evidence analysis. During the second examination, investigators discovered a small, diamond-shaped wound on the victim's lower jaw. After comparison, this wound completely matched the characteristics of the paper knife tip. From there, it was possible to conclude that the murder weapon was this paper knife or another tool with identical characteristics. After participating in the investigation, Dr. Li Shuangyu studied all the documents related to the case. Based on many details, he recreated the crime scene. He believed that the storage room was the first scene of the murder. There were no vertical blood stains on the floor, walls, or furniture in the room, proving that the victim had been restrained from behind by the perpetrator by strangling her, leaving her unable to resist. After that, the victim was pressed to the floor and stabbed many times by the perpetrator. Therefore, there were blood splatters on the victim's body and blood flowing on the floor around her head. Based on the depth of the wounds, it can be inferred that the murderer placed a white cloth on Margaret's left side and stabbed her 9 times, forming the shape of an inverted cross. Because of the layer of cloth and clothing blocking the wound, these wounds were not deep and were all cross-shaped. Then, the murderer removed the cloth and continued to stab her 22 more times, creating very deep wounds. Through examining the victim's clothes and the shape and tear marks on the white cloth, it was possible to rule out the possibility that the murder weapon was a common, sharp object. The blade of the murder weapon must have been curved, such as a paper knife. Then, using chemical methods, investigators examined the blood stains on the cloth and discovered a blood stain with a shape similar to the circular decoration on the handle of the paper knife. This could be the blood stain left by the murderer when placing the murder weapon on the cloth. At this point, Charles Robinson was almost certainly the murderer. On April 24, 2006, 26 years after the incident, the trial for the murder of Sister Margaret finally opened. More than 30 witnesses testified in court, including police officers who participated in the investigation of the case, the first nun to arrive at the scene, and experts in many fields. This series of circumstantial evidence was connected together, complementing each other, forming a very strong case against Charles Robinson. Interestingly, during the trial, Charles Robinson's lawyer presented a video recording of the police interrogation process. Their purpose was to prove that Charles Robinson had never confessed after being arrested. However, this video was later used by the prosecution as evidence that Charles Robinson had tried to confess to the crime. The video was recorded without Charles Robinson's knowledge. Initially in the video, Charles Robinson denied any involvement in Margaret's death, but as investigators left the interrogation room, he mumbled in a low voice, seemingly pleading for something. The prosecution claimed that he was confessing to Jesus for the crimes he had committed. Because the sound was so low, only a few words such as "Oh my Jesus" and "the noon" could be clearly heard. After nearly 20 days of trial, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Charles Robinson guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Robinson became the second Catholic priest in U.S. history to be convicted of murder. After Hans Smith, Robinson disagreed with the verdict and appealed several times over the next year, but all were rejected. 8 years after being imprisoned, Robinson died of a heart attack at the age of 76, with Robinson's death. The real motive for the crime has become an unsolved mystery, perhaps. As the prosecutor said, Robinson could not bear Magath, so he killed her and offered her to Satan. Where the truth lies, perhaps only those involved know. The Magath case is not only a personal tragedy, but also a stain on the history of the church, a reminder of the dark side of humanity, no matter how holy we are. Today's video ends here, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.